Christina Prudent, and this is Enchanted Ink. And today, I'm actually very, very excited about this one. Today, we're jumping right in to what is arguably the most popular fantasy franchise of our generation, Harry Potter. We'll be exploring some of the elements introduced in the first book of the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone, if you are outside of the US, essentially. Now, fun fact about myself, Sorcerer's Stone is actually the second Potter book that I ever read. As I mentioned in the intro of the last episode, I really wasn't interested in Harry Potter until year 2000 when my dad picked up Goblet of Fire really on a whim and started my superhero origin story. So I started at Goblet of Fire, and after that, I went back and read books 1 through 3. And honestly, I don't think that I would change that for the world because I don't know if I would have been where I am now, if I would have been as invested if I started at book 1, because Goblet of Fire was just so action packed. It's really what got me hooked. But anyway, one of the most famous lines from Sorcerer's Stone, the movie, not the book, he actually says something different in the book, but in the movie, Hagrid tracks Harry down on his 11th birthday in the cabin on the cliff and tells him, "You're a wizard, Harry." But what is a wizard? It's one of those questions that you really don't even ask yourself because from an early age, it's one of those words that's just part of the lexicon. It's part of your everyday language. But what is a wizard? And is there a difference between witch, wizard, and warlock? It's kind of hard to say. In most instances, witch and wizard are kind of used interchangeably or simply to indicate gender, like in Harry Potter. And wizard tends to carry a more neutral connotation, if not overtly positive. You usually have to be very specific to describe a dark wizard, which is interesting, at least to me, because witch generally carries a very negative connotation to it, even when it's used in casual conversation. You say, like, oh, that new neighbor downstairs, she's kind of a witch. Whereas if you said, oh, yeah, that new guy downstairs, he's kind of a wizard. It's completely different. One is obviously bad, and the other one implies that he must be really, really good at something, right? Now, warlock, however, is not a term that you really see as often anymore, and it tends to carry an evil connotation. It actually comes from an Old English word that directly translates to oathbreaker, which is probably why in literature and movies it usually describes wizards who deal in dark magic. Now, at this point, I feel like it's just so mainstream that most people do have an idea of what Harry Potter is about, but this is the part of the show where I give a synopsis and I start analyzing. So, spoiler alert, 20 years spoiler alert, if for whatever reason you don't know what happens in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling is the story of a young boy who learns on his 11th birthday that he's the orphan son of two powerful wizards and possesses unique magical powers of his own. A mysterious visitor rescues him from his relatives and takes him to his new home, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Though Harry's first year at Hogwarts is the best of his life, not everything is perfect. There's a dangerous secret object hidden within the castle walls, and Harry believes it's his responsibility to prevent it from falling into evil hands. But doing so will bring him into contact with forces more terrifying than he ever could have imagined. So, of course, Harry Potter is full of magical beings and phenomena, and we could choose any direction to go in with this book. But today, I want to talk about wands. Because again, it's one of those things that's just so ubiquitous, so common that you don't even really think about it. A wizard, a fairy godmother, a witch, you always picture them with a magic wand. But why though? Where did that come from? It's it's really almost impossible to pinpoint the exact origin of the magic wand in time or in region. I mean, this is really what this whole show is about, the history of magic and magical elements. And I've been researching this for a long time. And it really just seems like the concept of magic itself and magic wands, various cultures all around the world believed in the idea that a special stick could either generate or channel magical power. We even see it written about in the Bible. But the first written mention of magic wands seems to be in Homer's Odyssey, when Circe uses one to turn Odysseus and his crew into pigs. And by the way, if you haven't read The Odyssey, it's a must. It's an absolute classic. And we'll probably end up talking about it here a lot if it doesn't become its own episode, just because it is truly the origin of so many of our favorite myths and legends. Wands and staffs are also pretty prominently shown in ancient Egyptian art and hieroglyphs. And the historical significance of wands in ancient Egypt is actually pretty fascinating. We've come to find out through like archaeology and stuff that the wands were often made of ivory from hippo teeth, and they were commonly inscribed with either words of protection or pictures of animals. So the exact use is not really known. It doesn't seem to be what we think of as magic wands that were used to cast spells necessarily, but they were very clearly talismans at the very least. And then think about the common motif that we see on most sarcophagi, where the image of the pharaoh is carved into the lid, and they typically have their arms crossed over a staff or two staffs. So we know that it's a symbol of royalty and power. But when you see it in hieroglyphics, if not the pharaoh, then it's being held by a god, generally with the head of like a hawk or a dog or something, and they're using the staff to perform a miracle or do some type of magic. And like I brought up earlier, we even see magical staffs mentioned in the Bible. In the book of Exodus, we see Pharaoh's magicians throwing down their staffs and turning them into snakes to try to one up Moses and Aaron when they perform a miracle to prove that they were sent by God. And then we later see Moses using his staff to part the Red Sea. And there's plenty of religious art that shows Jesus holding a wand in various scenarios. I know I've seen one of him holding a wand while raising Lazarus or turning water into wine. But most likely the biggest influence on modern fantasy stories are the mention of wands in Celtic and Norse mythology. That's where we begin to see the lore specify the magical properties of different kinds of wood and the ritual behind crafting a wand. And from what I saw, the earliest popular how-to around wand making was a Renaissance grimoire called the Key of Solomon. And it went into very minute detail in terms of how you're supposed to make a wand. So it said things like that the wand needs to be crafted of virgin wood cut from the branch of a tree in one motion under the new moon or full moon or something like that. And a lot of new age spiritualities like Wicca still seem to adhere to a lot of those guidelines to this day. Let's take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll talk more about wands in Harry Potter specifically. If you haven't heard of Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. Completely free. I love free. I'm sure you love free. So that should be motivation enough.
But the cool thing about it is, it allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. And you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. And now, back to the show.
So, in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, one of the most important purchases that Harry makes is his wand from Mr. Ollivander. And quick fun fact, right before the break, we were talking about Celtic and Norse mythology and its influence on the modern interpretation of magic wands. And the Celtic Druids were seemingly the first to champion the magical properties of holly, specifically that it brings good luck and is particularly effective for spells of protection, especially against lightning. Now, Harry's wand happens to be holly with a phoenix feather core. And of course, he did not yet have his wand when he was a baby and received his scar, but I refuse to believe that J.K. Rowling did not know about this. Anyway, we get a good amount of our Potterverse wand lore right here in the beginning half of the very first book. We really don't even talk much about wands until the weighing of the wands in Goblet of Fire. But we learn from Ollivander that the wand chooses the wizard and won't perform as well in the hands of anyone else, and that no two wands are ever the same, which confused me for the longest time because Ollivander mentions that he only uses certain types of wood and 3 cores: unicorn hair, dragon heartstring, and phoenix feather. So just even doing the math, it makes no sense that no two wands would ever be the same. But we eventually learn that he's clearly not the only wand maker in England, and others use different cores. He just doesn't prefer them. And then, of course, there's the myth of the most powerful wand made of elderwood and a thestral hair core. In that legend, we find out that wands have independent magic to an extent. They're not just conduits for the magic of the wizard holding it, they're actually magical objects themselves. So when we say that the wand chooses the wizard and it won't work as well in the hands of another, the implication is that the wand itself has loyalty. And the only way to get a wand that isn't your own, that didn't choose you, to work for you like it did, is to win it in battle by disarming the holder. But that's all I'll say on that topic for right now. I couldn't not mention the Elder Wand, and I really debated with myself about whether or not to even address it in this episode, but we're literally on book 1. The true Elder Wand discussion is going to have to wait until Deathly Hallows or Beetle the Bard. One last thing to note is that wandless magic is incredibly uncommon in the Harry Potter universe. Children seem able to perform wandless magic like prior to starting at Hogwarts, but they can't really control it. And we learned some years ago from J.K. Rowling's website Pottermore that African and Native American wizards specialize in wandless magic, and the African wizards only started using wands in the 20th century. But it's not in the actual series. We still don't see it. So by and large, within and outside of the Potterverse, we usually only see wandless magic from other creatures like genies and elves. I almost said fairies, but even that kind of depends. So wands are really just one of those universally agreed upon elements when it comes to fantasy. So before we end, I want to make sure we at least take a second to look at Nicholas Flamel, since the story is called Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. The real Flamel was a French bookseller who died in 1418, and the alleged alchemist who's said to have created the Sorcerer's Stone. An interesting bit of trivia is that Flamel is the only real person to appear as a character in the Harry Potter series. The Sorcerer's Stone could supposedly turn any metal into gold, as well as produce the elixir of life, which is the key to immortality. And I've never been able to actually identify how. Like, if it turns other metals into gold, then how does it produce the elixir of life? Does it turn water into it? I still don't actually know the answer to that. But anyway, in the books, Flamel is a friend of Dumbledore, the headmaster of Hogwarts, and they invent the stone together. But in the real world myth, it states that Flamel created it after a mysterious stranger gave him a rare ancient Greek alchemy manuscript. It seems like his reputation was ultimately fueled by 17th century publishers trying to sell their alchemy books by saying that Flamel wrote them. So essentially, they're spinning up all of this legend around him to trick people into buying their old books. And then around that same time, there were apparently a number of reported sightings of him 200 plus years after he's thought to have died. So that solidified the idea that he discovered the key to immortality with the Sorcerer's Stone. And that's it. So if you have anything to add or share about the history of wizardry and magic wands, or if you have some ideas of other topics that you want me to cover, reach out to me. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Enchanted Ink Podcast, on Twitter at Enchanted Ink Pod, and on the web at enchantedinkpodcast.com. And if you like the show and want to hear more, make sure you subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you like to listen. See you next time.